Jai Hind and a very warm welcome to Malhotra's IAS. Today we are going to discuss one of the most hotly debated topics over the past fortnight, that is the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. Many NGOs, you must have read in the newspapers, had made hue and cry over the non-renewal of their FCRA certifications by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Right. So this becomes important from your UPSC Civil Services exam GS paper 2, that is polity and governance perspective, right? So let's first take a look at why exactly this was in news, right? So across all the newspapers, across all the media houses, this was one news that had made the headlines, that is FCRA and the NGOs, the tussle between the NGOs and the government and all those things, right? Even this date, even yesterday only, there was a news article that talked about, the CBI booking a Madurai-based NGO for FCRA violations. So that becomes of utmost importance for us to know about the provisions that are there in the law. But before that, this Missionaries of Charity, that was the NGO that first, said that its FCRA certification has not been renewed, it has been denied. But later, a couple of days back, the MHA granted its clearance to the renewal for the FCRA certification. Right, so these were some of the articles because of which this was in news. So let's get started. So first things first, when we talk about, here what we are discussing is that the element of foreign contribution. If there is any entity which wants to receive foreign contribution or foreign donation, as per the Ministry of Home Affairs, which is the dealing authority in the cases of foreign contribution, it stipulates that you have two routes to receive the money from any foreign organization. First is through registration and second is via seeking prior permission under the provisions of the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, right? But in both these channels, what the MHA says is that your organization or you as an entity must be registered under the relevant statutes in the country. What are those laws? One of those laws is the Societies Registration Act, and the other is the Indian Trusts Act 1882, right? So you have to be registered under first either of these acts, and then you can through either of these routes seek foreign funding. Right now what is going to be discussed here in this video is FCRA, because that is the area of interest for our discussion at this point of time. So moving to that particular thing, first thing is that the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act, it regulates the foreign funding of persons in India, and that is done by the Ministry of Home Affairs. जो आपका केंद्रीय गृह मंत्रालय है वो इसमें डील करता है, वो रेगुलेट करता है इन सब चीज़ों को अंडर दिस एक्ट, राइट? देन व्हेन यू टॉक अबाउट ऑन हु और किन लोगों के ऊपर, ऑन विच ऑफ द पर्सन्स डज द एक्ट अप्लाई और द प्रोविजंस अप्लाई, देन it applies on citizens who may be outside India. Certainly it applies to citizens who are residing in India, but maybe if you're outside of India but still you are an Indian citizen, then it applies to you. Apart from that, it applies to all the companies, their branches which are outside India but they have been registered or they have been incorporated in India, right? So if you have a branch in India, if you have been incorporated in India, then you are going to come under the ambit of the provisions of the FCRA. Apart from that, any individual, as we have discussed, all the associations, all the companies and the Hindu undivided family, right, just to name a few, these all are covered under the provisions of the FCRA. Then the question arises is that we are talking about the foreign funding or foreign contribution. So what exactly do we mean by this term, that is foreign contribution? So there is no ambiguity in it. That is being defined under section 2 clause 1 subclause H of the act itself. It says that anything that has been given as a donation or as any transfer that has been made by any foreign source will be deemed to be a foreign contribution, right? So we are going to take a look into what is this foreign source as well, but before that let's just take a look at what exactly is foreign contribution. So anything that is being made or that has been gifted to you which is not for your personal use. Mind you that if your friend from America, right, he's coming and you want him to bring some gift for you, then that article will not be counted as foreign contribution, but mind you that should be for your personal use. Right. Apart from that, any currency that will be counted as foreign contribution, whether that currency is Indian, that is INR, or that currency is based in any foreign denominations, that is it could be Canadian dollars, it could be US dollars or anything apart from that, right? So these are going to be covered under the foreign contribution. Then there is something that is, in terms of the non-resident Indians, when you talk about the NRIs, then whatever the donations NRIs are being contributing, that is not made a part of foreign contribution, that is excluded. But there's a difference here with NRI and the PIO, right? The persons of Indian origin, भारतीय मूल के जो भी लोग हैं जो बाहर रह रहे हैं लेकिन जिन्होंने भारतीय नागरिकता छोड़ दी है या कह लीजिए कि किसी और देश की नागरिकता हासिल कर ली है, that is they have assumed the nationality of any other nation, right? But they are persons of Indian origin. Then also their contributions will be counted, उसको गिना जाएगा foreign contribution की definition के अंदर the provisions of FCRA, right? So these are the things which are going to be counted and not counted as foreign contribution, right? जो भी exclusions हैं that we have just discussed. Now moving to the next thing, that is what is a foreign source. जब बात कर रहे हैं foreign source की, तो the act in its section 2 clause 1 sub clause J talks clearly about what is a foreign source. So if there is any government of any foreign country that is a part of the foreign source, right? The foreign government, if that is making any contribution, apart from that, any international agency will be counted or will be understood as a foreign source. But here is a catch, here's a caveat, that is, except the United Nations and the United Nations group, whatever the specialized agencies of the UN are there, that is the UNO group, that United Nations Organizations group, its specialized agencies, including the World Bank and including the International Monetary Fund. These will not be counted. These are exceptions, right? So they are not counted as foreign source. Apart from that, the other thing is that any foreign company or corporation or MNC for that matter, they are going to be counted as a foreign source under the section 2(1) subclause J of the FCRA, right? So that is what is a foreign source. Now when we talk about that, are there any prohibitions also, which the FCRA says that these people or these group of people are prohibited from receiving any foreign contribution. So you have the election candidates, certainly to make them politically uninfluenced or just to guard their influence from any foreign any foreign entities. This is certainly required. So election candidates, judges, government servants, election bearers of political parties, apart from that, members of any legislature in the country, it could be Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, Vidhan Sabha or Vidhan Parishad, right? And members or ones related to a registered newspaper, right? So these are some of the categories of persons or group of persons that are prohibited from accepting foreign contribution under FCRA, and for obvious reasons, right? ये आपको जो है common sense से भी दिख रहा है कि इन लोगों को for obvious reasons जो है prohibit किया गया है. Then when we talk about suspensions under FCRA, now coming to the moot question of this video, that is the NGOs, their certification not being renewed or being denied, that is what are the conditions under which your FCRA certification can be suspended or cannot be renewed, right? So FCRA requires that all the registered entities under the provisions of the act, they must have an audit of their accounts. That is the first thing, that is the first condition that is required. Obviously you are receiving the money, there has to be an audit for your account, that is you are not misappropriating or you are not misusing that money for some other purposes which might harm the security, unity, integrity of the country. And second is that for their on-field activities verification, that is the second thing is कि आपने जो भी आपका NGO है, जो भी आपकी association है, you are obtaining foreign contribution, you are receiving foreign funds, certainly you must be conducting some activity, you must be included, you must be involved in some of the developmental activities, maybe for example for the education of the rural children, maybe as an example you can imagine. So certainly whatever your on-field activity is there, that should be verified so as to make sure that the money is is being put to that particular use for which it has been intended to be received as foreign contribution, right? So those are the two conditions. Now whatever right now this was the specific point which the government had cited or the Ministry of Home Affairs had cited, okay, whatever the NGOs were operating who have not whose registrations FCRA certifications have not been renewed, they had not audited their accounts or when their audits were scrutinized, there were lapses which were found. There were financial irregularities which were found on the scrutiny of these audits of their accounts. So that is why the MHA had not renewed their FCRA certifications, right? So not going into the details of that, but yes, that is one argument that was put forth by the MHA. Then there are certain other stipulations as well. ये other stipulations क्या हैं? अब देखो, once an entity has received the FCRA certification, FCRA certification मिल गया किसी entity को, उसके बाद जो है, it is mandatory for that entity, for that association to file its annual return, and they are going to mention all the foreign contributions in this annual return until they have fully utilized that foreign contribution, right? Until they fully utilize their foreign contribution, they are going to mention it as a part of their mandatory annual return. That is one. And mind you, that particular entity that has received this certification under FCRA, only that entity can use those funds or utilize those funds. It is not the case that you can transfer those funds to somebody else, right? So you cannot transfer such funds to any other person or the entity, right? For example, there is an NGO which has got foreign funding, which has got certification for accepting foreign funding under FCRA. So it will have to, it will have to utilize those funds by itself. It cannot siphon that money off to any other party, right? And that is obviously understood because that is how the provisions of the act are, right? So ऐसा नहीं हो सकता कि आप किसी और को वो पैसा दे दो यूज करने के लिए. यहाँ पे लेकिन लॉ एक और चीज प्रोवाइड करता है FCRA, that is, that is a rare exception, that if for example there is another entity, another NGO maybe, or another individual who has also got the clearance to accept foreign funding under the provisions of FCRA, right, then उसको आप ये फंडिंग, उसको आप ये पैसा जो है ट्रांसफर कर सकते हो, राइट? फॉर एग्जांपल देयर इज एन इंडिविजुअल ए हु गॉट द FCRA nod, the FCRA certification, and there is an individual B who also has the FCRA clearance for obtaining foreign funding. Then this individual A can transfer the money to individual B, but that is going to be a very rare case, right? That certainly is not going to be the norm. Okay, so that is with respect to some other stipulations, right? So now when we talk about the most important thing, that is all this hue and cry, all the NGOs making a mess of it, the government, and the NGO in apparently a constant tussle with each other. So the question arises, what is the need of having such a law in the place in the first instance? So what is the need is, the first thing the government has said that, mind you, between the years 2010 and 2019, there has been sufficient ground which gives you, or which gives the government an arsenal up its sleeve to put the NGOs in the dock. That is, there has been the inflow of foreign contributions that has doubled over the years, over these years. So certainly it could be bona fide, it could be mala fide, right? Not going into that right away, but yes, that is something which raises eyebrows and which calls for regulation. I am not saying over regulation, but at least regulation which should be proper, first thing. Then the second thing is that, this is the second argument that has been put forth by the MHA and by the government certainly, that whatever the money came from as foreign funding, that money was not utilized for the particular purpose, for the specific purpose for which the money was sought, right? So that is, the contributions, they were not utilized for the purpose for which they were granted or for which the entity or association or NGO was registered, and the money was siphoned off for some other activity. So the first thing that comes to our mind is that that money must have gone into the, either through the money laundering, or that could have been utilized for some other activity which is detrimental to the interest of the country. So certainly that calls for proper regulation, right? So that is certainly what is the need of the hour, that is proper regulation, but not over regulation, right? So that brings us to a very fine and very nuanced conclusion to this video, that there is an American academic by the name of Lawrence Lessig who has said that over regulation, it tends to corrupt citizens and it weakens the rule of law. So certainly we want to abide by the rule of law, we want to uphold the rule of law, and that is why proper, measured, balanced regulation is called for. But the government must keep it in mind, the state must keep it in mind, that over regulation will be detrimental not just to the interests of a free civil society, but also to the overall environment in the country, and certainly to the interest of the common man, of the common citizen, of we the people of India, right? So on that note, it's a wrap from my side. I believe that you were able to enhance your understanding with respect to FCRA provisions. If that is the case, then do give or do hit that like button, right? So I'll see you in one such another informative video. Until then, all of you follow COVID appropriate behavior, stay safe, study well. Thank you and Jai Hind.